Where he lies.
你話咩話？
Where he lies.
Oh, where he lies, where he lies.
Where he lies.
Ni hao, konnichiwa. Welcome to Foxflix Rice. I am Fox. Yes, this is a new episode. Christmas miracles do happen, or Foxmas as we call it round here. And with me today is a good friend of mine who's a big movie buff, particularly a Toei masochist, or Toei head, or whatever they call themselves these days, Mr. Jonathan Vargas.
Hey, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Yeah, doing good. How long have we been trying to do this now?
I would say months? Because the last two times, I just kept pushing it back because something came up or something happened. And matter of fact, I was this close into canceling it, but I'm like, nah, let's get this out of the way.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, so for those wondering why there's not been an episode, this is kind of why. We have been trying. We have desperately been trying. But yeah, very excited for today's episode. We're going to do something a bit different. We're going to talk about 3 films by Kinji Fukasaku, who some of you may know as the director of Battle Royale, or the director of the Yakuza Papers, or Battles Without Honor and Humanity. But believe it or not, he actually has a lot of films. And he has a lot of very good films that aren't really talked about so much in the West these days. So Jonathan and I, when we were talking, we kind of wanted to take a dive into some of these. And we have picked out 3 that are kind of, I don't know, would you say they're lesser known, John? Or
Yeah, I would, especially now, because I could be wrong. But I know that Triple Cross and Legends did get DVD releases in the UK and the US, but Haruku never got a release stateside or UK wise. It's always been local. I think it got a Blu-ray release for, I think Toei released it, locally, but unfortunately these films are very, very hard to come by. I think I could be wrong, but I think the Legends DVD, the remastered, uncut Japanese versions, out of stock. So, yeah, these are pretty hard to come by, especially if you're living in the United States or the UK.
yeah, no, exactly. So, we kind of wanted to highlight some of these. A real quick blurb, though, because I know some of you listen to this to hear about some upcoming releases. We've got some exciting releases that I'm really looking forward to. We've got the In the Line of Duty box set coming from 88 Films in the US next year. There's going to be in the UK, Eureka's putting out the In the Line of Duty films, and they're also putting out Violent Streets, Hideo Goshi's Violent Streets, and Bullet Train, of all things.
Woohoo!
So yeah, which is one of my favorite. People call it a Sonny Chiba movie, but it's not really a Sonny Chiba movie. It's a Kentakagura movie. But yeah, that's still one of my favorites from the era. I'd watch that over Speed any day. So yeah, kind of really looking forward to that. And obviously on the Michelle Yeoh side of things, Magnificent Warriors by 88 Films in the US is getting its UK release through Eureka. So, but it's kind of exciting, the Hideo Goshi Violent Streets. It's not one of my favorites personally, but I'm hoping that it really opens the door for more of those kinds of off-the-cuff films, sort of famous Yakuza films that we don't really talk about in the West so much. I mean, what's your thoughts on that one, John?
I am so happy that this is happening because this year we got some big announcements in the Toei Yakuza films, the classic ones. I know that this classic Yakuza film that came out in the 60s called Big Time Gambling Boss.
Oh yeah, from Radiance. I forgot about that one. Yeah, so yeah, that's coming. Yakuza Graveyard is also coming from Radiance, another Fukusaku film that's coming next year.
Right, and then Violent Streets is coming out, which I am really happy. I can't wait to get that. I'm hoping that that's either a region free or a region 1 Blu-ray, because the copy I have, it's actually a DVD that they released in France, but the quality is not that great. So it would be really nice to see an HD version of this, because I will say Violent Streets, the first time I saw it, I did not like that film. I really did not like it, but as several viewings, I've seen that movie dozens of times throughout the years. I really, really liked it, and I think it's one of the more unique 70s Yakuza films from that time, because a lot of them were following the Fukasaku style. Gosha was like, nope, I'm not doing it his way. I'm going to do it my way. So I think that's what helps it become a standout, and not to mention, as Toei marketed, the big four with some of the biggest stars at Toei at the time being in this film.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, I enjoy the film, but it didn't. I remember when I was reading up on reviews on it and what people were telling me about it, like a lot of people were blown away by the violence of it. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of talk around how shockingly violent the film was. And to be honest, from that angle, it didn't strike me as anything special. Maybe for those that are kind of uninitiated in the Jitsuroku genre, subgenre, perhaps maybe it's shocking. So for me, it kind of like it was good. I still enjoyed watching it, but it didn't stick out in my mind. You know what I mean? Like it does for some people, because I know it is a bit of a cult classic for some. They absolutely love it, especially fans of Hideo Goshiya. But he has many, many films that he's done that are worthy of release. So I'm hoping this kind of opens the door to more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'll say this. I know we gotta get started, but I want to say this. Like, there's a couple Hirogoshi films that I would love to get like a remaster, and it's a couple of his Toei samurai films that he did. The Samurai Wolf series.
Ah, yeah.
I think though to me, I think those two films are, in my opinion, some of his best work from a visual standpoint, because this is Gosha just being creatively, visually just appealing. Because there's some images, there's some shots in that film that I would probably equal it right there from the best of Kurosawa's samurai films. So I'm hoping one day somebody out there could remaster those films in like an HD Blu-ray version, because I know they did get DVD releases, but they're super expensive now.
Yeah, yeah. No, and don't worry, man. We've got time. The first half hour of the show is kind of free flow. We can talk about releases and stuff. So there's no rush too much. But yeah, like I'm just kind of glad that we're getting all these films over, and even on the Hong Kong side, because I found that 2022 has been a really strong year for Hong Kong, but not so much Japan. However, 2023 is looking to be a very strong year for Japanese films coming over out in terms of the classics anyway, stuff we listen to and talk about here.
Yeah.
Because obviously, Drive My Car did get a release from Mubi and Criterion and whatnot, but yeah.
All I'm gonna say is no comment about that movie.
Yeah, well, speaking of cars and car chases, our first film today that we're going to talk about is called The Triple Cross.
Woohoo!
It's from 1992, directed by Kinji Fukasaku, as all the films are today, so I'm not going to keep mentioning that. It was starring Kenichi Hagewara, Kazuya Kimura, Keiko Oginome, and Sunny Chiba, and a few other kind of well-known names for either like working with Fukasaku or some of the V-Cine crowd as well. Now, real quick on this one, because I know Jonathan recommended this to me highly. It's been on my list for a long time to check out, but I have to mention that how I actually found this film was because of Keiko, because I'm a really big fan of her sister, Yoko Oginome, who
Oh,
is a very popular J-pop idol from the 80s and 90s. And there's kind of a funny history there because Yoko went to go into acting and Keiko went to go into J-pop to do the idol thing. And during the auditions, they determined that they were both kind of like the opposite. Like Keiko would be better for acting and Yoko was a better singer. So let's put her in the J-pop thing through the talent agency and Keiko into acting through the other talent agency. So there's kind of a quirky history there with that. But obviously I'm a big music guy, so yeah. But yeah, that's actually how I first found out about this film. I didn't find out about it because of Fukusaku. I just saw Keiko's name on it and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Because I have seen some of her other works and I do like her in general. So yeah, it was quite quirky. But yeah, so the summary of this film, which kind of doesn't do it justice, but what Letterboxd gods have said is following the bloody aftermath of a heist, three robbers are double crossed by a new accomplice who is then tracked down amid escalating carnage and a spectacular car chases. Hmm.
that's a pretty accurate description of the film.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say it's accurate. I have issues with the car chases, though, I gotta admit.
Should we save that for later?
Yeah, let's save that for later because I want to talk to you about that because I know you'll understand. But yeah, this film, it reminded me of kind of a more polished V-Cine in a way. Like some of the VCine that came out in the mid '90s, like Score and Score 2 and stuff like that. You know, those VCine heist films. This kind of reminded me of that, but much more polished, obviously with a higher budget and you know, Fukasaku's flair. Because I found this film looks really good. You know, visually speaking, it kind of reminds me of you know, like Gonin and like Black Angel, those Ishi films. It kind of reminds me of those from a visual standpoint. So yeah, I mean, I kind of wasn't expecting that from Fukasaku because I know he's quite versatile, which again is why we wanted to do this episode to kind of showcase some of his versatility. Yeah, it was really moody. I liked the soundtrack a lot, and just yeah, I thought it captured kind of a different take on the heist movie with the focus on youth. I mean, which is a running theme in a lot of Fukasaku's work. I mean, so what did you think, John? Like overall, what's your thoughts on before we get into it properly?
So I'm going to say this, and this is just my opinion. And as you said, that I did recommend this film for you. This is actually one of my favorite Fukasaku films because to me, I saw this as, like you said, it's basically like a V cinema film on a budget. But I also saw this as Fukasaku's answer to the Hong Kong crime dramas, action films that were basically becoming popular in the late 80s and 90s. And I think
Mm,
this was like a throwback to a lot of the films that he was doing in the 70s. Like to me, you know, for some fans that don't know about this film, Fukusaku did a film similar to this called Violent Panic: The Big Crash, where it basically involves a bank robber who's, you know, tagging along with a girlfriend and he's going out there robbing people. And the last 30 minutes of that film is just destruction derby, car crashes, you name it. And Fukasaku, I felt, was trying to do that again in this film, but with a higher budget. And I just loved how relentless, how kinetic, and how fast paced this film was because it never slows down. You could say that, you know, it does. There are some flaws to it. I will admit that. But the one thing that I truly like, and this is the one credit I've always given Fukasaku, is that man knows how to pace a film. And what I got was just sheer enjoyment. I was able to turn my brain off for 90 minutes and just go with the flow. And like, I think for me, it's just, in my opinion, I think this is the greatest action film that has come out in the 90s in Japanese cinema because this was at a time when Japanese cinema was kind of like scaling back from like the classic action films that they were doing in the 70s. And granted, you had V Cinema and the likes of Takashi Miike coming out, but I felt that none of them were at the level Fukasaku was at because he was working with a budget and he was able to like basically get creative and do crazy things in this.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I know what you mean because this is kind of like this when I watch this reminds me of just a pure Japanese action movie, not necessarily a crime movie or a Yakuza film. You know, it definitely leans more into that just high paced, high energy action template, so to speak. Now, it's interesting you mentioned about it not letting up because I agree with you, but I do feel like there's issues with pacing in the ending, which for me, I started tuning out a bit. And it was mainly because I felt like the car chase went on way too long. Because, and this is something I don't know if it's a me thing, but I have yet to see a Japanese film with like a really good car chase. Like I've seen some that are unique and interesting and slightly different, but I don't know. It feels like that's kind of the one part of like action that unless you're talking about bikes, specifically motorbikes and stuff, because they've got experience from the Kamen Rider stunt team, especially at you know Toei and stuff, because they've been doing bike stuff for years. Because there's a lot of biker and bike movies, bike race movies and stuff that came out in the 70s and 80s. It was quite a popular topic to cover. But I don't know. For me, like the car chase thing, they don't seem to have like nailed it at this point. Like now, I haven't seen Violent Panic yet. That's on my list, which I know is supposed to be really crazy in OTT. But that was the one thing I just felt like that ending sequence with the cars. It just got a little repetitive because it just went on a bit too long, and there wasn't much. You know, when you shoot a chase scene and you compare it to like Hollywood or Hong Kong, and there's a lot of like different angles and there's different actions with the cars. You know, there's jumps, there's flips, there's all kinds of crazy. Here, it didn't feel like there was enough variation in the chase, if that makes sense. because it kind of kept stopping and restarting as the story goes. It kind of the chase goes, and then they kind of stop and restart a lot. So it felt like it was starting to drag a bit for me. But that was just me because I didn't like get completely absorbed into the chase scene. Mainly because of the stop and starts, and I'm used to watching like Hong Kong Jackie Chan car chase scenes and stuff with really crazy stunts and all of that stuff. And yeah, I don't know, is that a Japan thing? I mean, you've probably seen more movies than I have with car chases in them, John. So that's something I actually wanted to talk to you about. Like, is it just the Japanese thing where they haven't quite nailed it yet, or is it just a different way of doing it? What's your opinion on that?
I'll say this, and this is just my opinion. I think maybe at the time they were not as experienced as, like, say, Hollywood and Hong Kong, because again, too, like a lot of budgets for Japanese cinema is very, very low
Yeah,
compared to like what Hong Kong and Japan, I mean, and Hollywood are working with. So you could say that then maybe there's just like a lack of experience. And the thing too that I will say, I noticed that like when you said that it was cutting back and forth, where it would start and restart, there is a moment where one of the main characters, gets shot and killed, and then it tries to make us feel sympathetic towards this character. And I can see why that might slow the action down. But for me, it never bothered me because
mm,
I've seen some Japanese action films where there's like a huge shootout and then it just stops because they're
yeah,
having a character development moment, and that goes on for like 10 minutes and then it'll cut back to the action. I've seen worse action scenes than that, where here it was fine. I still enjoyed it. I wasn't bored by it. And I think because throughout most of that car chase, a lot happens. Like it just keeps building up to one thing after another. I don't want to get into it because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who has not seen it and wants to go out and see it. But I like that like it wasn't just one continuous car chase. There was different layers to the car chase where they had this person chasing them, they had this person chasing them, or oh
yeah.
my god, they had to switch vehicles or something like that. So I was entertained by it. But I see what you mean. You like what you're saying about them pausing, I mean restarting. You're right. That would not happen in a Hollywood film
Yeah.
or even a Hong Kong film.
Yeah, I mean, I understood the character development moment. The character development moment is talking about Keiko Oginome's character, who plays like a young, almost like a Kogal, and I found her really annoying.
Oh my god. Thank you. Yeah,
I hate that character archetype. I mean, I know it serves a purpose, but it was just like I was like, "Can somebody just kill her, please?" Because the reason why I say that is because like she's part of the antagonist, right? Like it's pretty obvious. So I don't think that's too spoilery to say that she's an antagonist, so she does her role well in that regard. But it's just like she's going to get it at some point, and that was something which I think for me affected the pacing because there were plenty of times where you thought like the antagonists were going to finally get theirs, but they didn't. And it was like, huh. Especially when you're used to like other Fukusaku movies, especially his older works and stuff that move quite fast in comparison, pacing wise. Because don't get me wrong, Triple Cross is very, very tight, but it's no Jitsuroku crazy French New Wave inspired. Every 10 minutes is a major thing, and then there's a 10-minute discussion. So yeah, I don't know, like it's crazy. I mean, I was kind of disappointed about Chiba's character because when I was reading up online about this, people were pitching it as a Sonny Chiba movie, and unfortunately, like it's not a Chiba movie. Like, yes, he directed the action, he helped with the stunt work and stuff, but it's that classic thing where in the later movies he did, he wasn't really like he was a main character, but he's not in the entire film type thing. You
Yeah,
know,
it's funny that you mentioned that because I will say, if we're gonna talk about flaws, I do have a major flaw with this film because I don't know how you rate films if you do like if you do it by numbers or by star ratings. I rate films from star ratings. This movie would have been a 4 star, but to me, it loses a star because of what you said about, the main antagonists. And that is Kazuya Kimura and Keiko. Like, to me, in my opinion, I think they are the most annoying characters I have ever
yep.
seen in a Fukusaku film. And what I don't like that Fukusaku does in this film with those characters is he devotes a lot of time to them.
Yeah, I was going to talk to you about this too because I noticed that because it's almost like It's like they are very unlikable. They are
Oh,
very, very unlikable. And it's not even like, "Oh, well, it's a Jitsuroku, they're supposed to be unlikable." It's like he almost tries to take a sympathetic angle with
yes.
it, but it doesn't quite land. And this is what I'm saying. This isn't us being negative about the film, by the way. We just talk about this stuff. Me and John, we haven't spoken about these films outside of, right now. Like, we just know we both watched them. So, yeah, like, I did notice that. And it was kind of bothering me because I felt like there wasn't enough time with the main three of the heist. It's almost like, because even from when the film starts, when the antagonist is introduced, it spends a lot of time with him. There are supposed to be these emotional moments, like when he betrays, this again is not a spoiler because it's in the synopsis, but when he betrays the three main mobsters, thieves, whatever you want to call them, it should be this shocking emotional moment, but we haven't spent enough time with them because we spent all this time with this hot headed prick who needs 50 million to start up a freaking rock club,
Yeah.
you know?
And the thing is too, it's like from the minute he opens his mouth, I got to tell you, the first time I saw this movie, and the minute that character opened his mouth, I said, "Yeah, I hate him. I do.
Same. He
I
just
hope he is so annoying." And the thing is too, it's like I don't know if that's an acting decision or was Fukasaku directing him to be that annoying. So that the audience can hate the character, but the thing is, a lot of time is devoted to him and Kiko, and I just was like, man, if they could just trim some of that and focus more on the main protagonists, who I got to tell you, like, I was sad about Sonny. I wish he had more screen time, and also
mm,
Renji Ishibashi, who is probably well known for being in several dozen Takashi Miike films. He's basically the man in the wheelchair in Audition.
yeah.
He had somewhat of like a small role, but it was an interesting role because they give him like a backstory, and I was very bummed out how small of a role that of the role of how small that role was. I'm sorry. And Kenichi in the film, like, we follow him, we follow his girlfriend, and most of the time I'm like, man, I wish they would go back to him because I like that character. I found his character to be quite fascinating with the very little development he had, because he's very stoic, but like, I rather deal with him than deal with these two kids that are just basically like just annoying as hell. And I was with you. I was like the whole time, like, God, please, can they die now? Can they die now? Can they just get shot
Yeah.
now? But
Yeah.
for me, since we're talking about flaws, that's the only flaw I have with this film. If it wasn't
Yeah.
for that, I think this would be a 4-star classic.
Yeah, no, exactly, and I totally get you on that. I mean, and since we're talking about lack of screen time, let's talk about, Yumi Takegawa for a minute. She plays a character called Misato, and very underutilized, which is a shame because her character has such a strong presence when she is on screen. I wanted desperately to see more of her and not Keiko's character.
She has one of my favorite scenes, and I have a feeling you might know what I'm talking about, is when she's getting confronted by the two bikers.
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
love that. Like, I mean, yeah, like, I don't want to spoil it because I do want people to watch it so then they can get it. But like, the way that scene ends, it is so over the top. But I was there like, yes.
Well, that's the thing, and from a filmmaking standpoint, right? Like, you give the character that really strong scene, and then I was like kind of expecting to follow her more from that point onward, because up until that point, she kind of had been peripheral. Like, she was introduced early on, and she was important as part of the team because she's the getaway driver and all that. Their normal getaway driver, and she's got a relationship with one of the characters. From then on, it's like she's background. And then they introduce her like that. That's when they kind of give her her moment, when she gets confronted by two bikers who are like, "Hey, sexy, you want to come with a real man?" That kind of thing. And she has this badass moment where she just owns them, makes them look like little boys that they are.
Can I say this? And I'm sorry to cut you off. Like,
Yep.
that moment that she has with the bikers is more badass than any scene that Kiko was doing, because they were trying to make Kiko into a badass. I did not believe it for 1 second.
No, the thing is about Keiko's character Mai, and we can explain this. We can extrapolate on this a little bit without spoiling. But
Extrapolate.
she's basically that kind of like, she's a kid. She's like a big kid, and the reason for it, which is revealed later on, it near the end. There's a reason for it, which makes sense, but it didn't give that sympathetic vote, not to me, because our whole thing is like, oh, I'm excited. I've got guns. Yeah, we're shooting people. Yes, this is exciting. So much adrenaline. Oh my God, living life. Shoot, 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 And she's just into that crazy roller coaster, like everything is a thrill. And it's so one dimensional and
Oh my
superficial
god.
to me, as well as being highly annoying.
You know who she reminded me of? Like, it was a mixture of Harley Quinn and
Mm.
Angelica from the Rugrats.
Yeah. Yeah, because she's got a princess complex.
Oh my god, like, and it's very annoying. Like, at times I'm just like, God. But I know that we're kind of ragging on this, but for me, in my opinion, that's the only major flaw I have with this film. There's so many other great moments I do want to go into, with this film as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm just getting this out the way because the other thing was with the blonde guy, his main character Kanzaki, who's the main male antagonist. It is strange because, as you mentioned, John, the whole thing with so much focus is put on him, and it kind of still don't understand quite why. Because like I said, it's like they try to kind of turn him into a sympathetic character at certain points, but then they don't. They backpedal on it, and I don't know. I'm a big fan of Jitsuroku films and, anti-hero and that whole gray area. Like I'm totally fine with that. And he really didn't land in that for me. And I don't know. It felt like the film was kind of supposed to be a vehicle for him in a way, with how much, like you said, how much time is put into him and how much focus. But I don't know, it just didn't land in that regard. I mean, again, great film overall, definitely recommend it, There were just some strange decisions, and I don't know if it was a way to try and be subversive or kind of focus on the bad guys type thing just for the sake of it or to be a bit different. I don't know what the decision behind that was. But yeah, it does feel a bit it feels like it's kinda 2 films fighting against each other at points, but not to a point of where the film is bad. It's just I don't know. It doesn't flow as smoothly altogether as you would expect from that perspective, from story and characters. It's kind of strange in a way. So I don't know because like it kind of gives a vibe of like okay, this is a delinquent biker movie. If you've ever seen any of those.
I've seen a few of them. Not my cup of tea, but like I get what you're saying.
But just to wrap that up, and then John, you can say, your last bits. Um, yeah, like it was kind of strange because it did feel a bit back and forth, and but those issues with those characters did stick out to me immediately, just like with you, John. Like immediately it was like, oh, I don't like these. These are like the annoying characters that to me are okay in small doses in films, or if they're like a side antagonist, but spending main serious chunks of film time with them, unless they're servicing the story, which they didn't really, so to speak. It didn't work for me in that regard on those things.
So my last thing that I want to say, and it's I just found this to be kind of ironic. So in my opinion, this is the last negative thing I'll say about the film. I felt that Kazuya Kimura and Kiko, I felt that they gave the worst performances in this entire film. And I don't know whether it's on them or Fukasaku. And the irony in all this is that both of them got Japanese Academy Award nominations for their performances.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, myself and Jonathan, we're no strangers to J Film, but it did feel like they were both trying too hard. At the same time, I can kind of see Fukasaku prodding them and being like, more, 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 because of how consistent that is throughout the film. But yeah, it did feel like a bit, I don't know, almost anime-ish in a way because it was really OTT over the top. So yeah, I completely agree. But yeah, as far as like what's good about the film, pretty much everything else. I mean, were there any specific highlights for you, John?
Oh, there was a lot of highlights. I love the opening. Like the opening of the film is just vintage Fukasaku
Yeah.
with his fast cutting and freeze frames. It's like if you've seen several Fukasaku films, especially from the works of the 70s, it's like basically a welcome addition to the film. I really liked Kenichi. I can never say his last name. What's his last name?
Hagiwara?
Hagiwara. I really liked his performance in here because he really kept the film together.
Yeah,
He
he was
did
the
such a good
anchor. He was the
yeah,
anchor.
he was the anchor in all this. He really kept the film together because when Chiba and Renji Ishibashi, when their characters basically disappeared, you know, they didn't have that one performance to just basically level everything out because, like we said, the film focuses so much on Kazuya and Kiko, and they're giving very over the top performances. It's nice that there's a contrast to it where Kenichi is just being stoic and straightforward, which I really like. His performance is very subtle, and he has a really cool moment, which I love, is the scene where and I thought it was hysterical, is where he goes to the loan shark office where Kazuya basically borrowed like 50 million yen from them. So he goes in there and he's basically like just kicking ass and taking names, trying to figure out where, you know, Kazuya's character is at. And I love the over the top Yakuza boss. It's obvious that he's like a comic relief. So I really love that scene, just how crazy and over the top it is on a comedic moment. And another highlight that I do have with this film, and I always thought that this was just such a cool moment. It's near the end of the film where they're doing the bus. Not I'm not the. What I meant to say was my favorite scene is actually right before the car chase. Um, Kazuya and Kiko's characters are basically waiting outside of the bar that they're trying to buy out. And the rock band is out there waiting to perform. And Kenichi's character is waiting for him. So then he sets like a little bomb. He walks away, the bomb goes off, and like everyone is like flying in the air. And I'm like, oh my God. But he does that like I don't know if you have heard of this group called the Lonely Island. They're like a band.
No, I haven't heard of them.
Okay, so like they do like a lot of parody songs. They have a song that goes, "Cool guys doesn't look at explosions; they just keep walking away." And like the minute like this explosion goes off, like he sets a bomb in the middle of the street while nobody is looking. There's a bunch of people in the middle of the street in a corner. The bomb goes off. A bunch of people start flying in the air, but it doesn't kill anybody. And he's just walking, like basically walking all badass. He never turns back. And
Yeah.
the first thing that came to my mind was, "Cool guys don't look at explosions." They walk
Nice.
away.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of great moments, that I'm sure one will probably come to my mind. But what was your favorite moment?
Yeah, so I actually really liked all the scenes with the Yakuza outside of the scene with Misato, you know, and the razor blades and the biker thing. I actually really like the Yakuza boss because obviously you know, so for those who are new or don't know, myself and John were big Yakuza heads. We watch a lot of Yakuza film, especially Jitsuroku. And it's kind of funny because it's like if you have that background knowledge, basically what Kinji does here is he takes his whole thing about Yakuza and flips it on its head. So he makes the Yakuza just look like this incompetent, like this particular family is just like the biggest ball of incompetent idiots, even the boss. And it's just so well done, you know. And I forget who plays the Yakuza boss, but he's a legend because he's in a lot of Toei stuff and he's been in a lot of older Yakuza films as well. Yeah, I loved that whole dynamic. Anytime that they were in that office with that dynamic going on, especially the intro, I just loved because it's just like, you know, Kenichi's character goes in there and he's just like bossing them around. He's basically got them by the balls, and they're all caught with their pants down, and they're just kind of like, what do we do? And then the boss is like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And there's a really good joke where, because basically the plot is the young guy is supposed to bring the 50 million to them to get a bigger loan,
Right.
and so Kenichi goes in there to steal the 50 million back effectively. And he's like, "Oh yeah, open the safe, open the safe. Yes, check the safe." And there's like maybe 5,000 yen in a bundle in the safe. It's completely empty otherwise. And he's looking at the boss, and the boss is just like, you know, the recession hits us all, even crime. You know, because during that
Oh my
time,
God.
obviously, was the big Japanese recession, the start of the last decade, obviously. And it's just like he doesn't believe it, and then he's like, "No, seriously, seriously." So it's just like,
It's ridiculous. And you know what I also love about that scene is that like and I this is how you know, like, he was making a joke out of the whole Yakuza thing. Kenichi goes in there with just one gun. He
Yeah.
has a pistol, and like there's like 9 or 10 guys, and all of them are just scared shitless. Like they look like they're about to shit their pants. And I'm just like, can not one of them like literally go up to him and jump him? And then I just took it as like Fukasaku is basically saying, and this is my interpretation, that most Yakuzas are cowards.
Yeah, and I think that might have been a subtle commentary. I'm not saying that this is a deep, psychological film or social
Right,
commentary
of
film,
course.
but I think that that might have been a bit of a nod to how the Yakuza had changed from the 60s and 70s as well. Because obviously in the late 70s and the 80s and even the early 90s, there were all these new laws that came in to crack down on Yakuza activity in Japan and stuff. So the kinds of people you started to get going through were slightly different. The attitudes and their mentality, it was all different. I mean, it even changed again in the 2000s, you know what I mean? But I do think that was kind of a subtle nod to like maybe how the modern Yakuza was for the time of the film, or at least the perception of them, as opposed to, the badass Ninkyo stuff or the Jitsuroku craziness of the 70s boom. So yeah, I do think it was kind of funny to have that in a film specifically from him. Like that stuck out in my mind as soon as that scene was happening for sure. I really, really enjoyed it.
Right. And then one last thing too, because since you said that, one other thing that I noticed, how you were saying like how these young new Yakuzas of that time weren't as like, I would say, fearless or tough enough compared to like the guys from the 60s and the 70s. Another character who appears, who happens to be a hitman from Yoshiro Harada, played by Yoshiro Harada, he's the only guy out of that whole entire group that actually does something to, try to stop them. Because like throughout the film, like the Yakuza's are going after Kazuya's character, and the only one that does anything is Yoshiro's character, who happens to be like this heroin addicted hitman, an older middle aged man, and in the film, like he does some crazy stunt work. Like so, that's a good point. That's a good thing, a theory that you pointed out about like maybe that was a sign of saying like, hey, these new kids today they don't got no balls, so let the old school veterans handle that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's funny because everyone thinks he's absolutely crazy because he's a classic hitman in a way. And I think that it's funny because even the Yakuza boss, the family boss, is scared of him. So it's kind of funny that it's like he's old school. He's very much an old school 70s archetype, but it's like everyone views him as really unpredictable or dangerous because he's got a heroin addiction as well, which again I think is another thing that got kind of filtered in because if we talk about the history of Yakuza film real quick, what I noticed is over time from like the 70s through to the 80s is like a lot of the Yakuza film that came out in the 80s, drugs were more of a focus. The switch to like selling drugs and dealing drugs, which the Yakuza used to be quote unquote in terms of history, highly against. And that was kind of a commentary thing about that happened throughout the 80s is the change in values and what would make money, what wouldn't make money, because like in the 60s and 70s it was all about setting up these corporations, getting involved in politics, getting involved in the economy, as in getting involved in stock trading and that sort of thing. And then sort of in the 80s you had this evolution into they need to be legitimate businesses, but that doesn't make as much money, so where can we make more money? Well, drugs, which was a big theme in the 80s and 90s Yakuza movies especially. So yeah, it's kind of funny to see that with that perspective. Like I said, I think if you have any experience in just knowing those films or having an idea of those times, yeah, it kind of makes this film, it elevates this film a little bit more. You certainly don't need that, but it makes those smaller scenes with the Yakuza stick out a bit more than just kind of like, oh, here's the derpy Yakuza family, trying to make some money.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, because I was gonna say this because you were asking who that actor was who plays like the Yakuza boss. His name was Noboru Yana. He was basically like a bit actor slash supporting actor in dozens and dozens of Toei Yakuza films from the 60s and 70s. So it was really nice to see him in a much more bigger role because he was usually like sometimes a glorified extra. and he would have like a couple of moments, but like I think here is just like one of his more memorable moments. I mean, in his career, because he's finally playing a character that that lasts for more than 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I mean, yeah, it's just he's the comic relief, like John mentioned, but it's not like he's not a clown. He's just funny because he's trying his best, but he's just
He's
yeah.
just too animated. That's all it is. But
Yeah.
I love it. That's the thing. It's just dark comedy in my opinion. And sometimes a film like this needs some comedy.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think thinking about this actually, since we're talking, if they'd have done that with Keiko's character, maybe with the my character a bit, that might have helped. Thinking about it, if they'd have tried to inject more comedy with her.
It's funny you mentioned that because I felt like they were trying, but it was just so over the top and just not smooth that it just came across as annoying. And you're just like, oh, bitch, just shut up.
Yeah, when someone gonna knife her and finish it,
Like,
or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
now I will say I'm not gonna say this on, I don't want to spoil nothing, but Yoshira Harada's character, the hitman, the heroin hitman, he does probably my favorite thing in the whole movie, but I am not gonna spoil it. And I think, and I have a feeling you might know what I'm talking about. He shoots somebody without even turning his head. He
Yeah.
shoots somebody from behind. I'm not gonna mention who that person is. I don't want to spoil it, but that is my favorite moment in the whole movie.
Well, this is what's interesting, right? It kind of has that Fukasaku signature where death is like a matter of fact. So it's something which I've noticed he does in his films with certain characters, where because he tends to either do one of two things. He either tends to make death a really important character moment, or he treats it as a very black and white matter of fact, like yeah, this person was gonna die, so they're dead now. Like it's very quick, sharp.
Yeah.
So
It's funny you mentioned that because one thing I've always liked about Fukasaku in a majority of his films, not all of them, because there's some where he does it. I like that he doesn't glamorize the deaths. Like
well, that's yeah,
he
that's what I
doesn't do it in
mean.
like yeah, no, I know what you're saying, but like I really appreciate that because I see that in a lot of movies where let's say if, henchman number 1 gets killed, it's done in this slow motion, very artistic like motion. With Fukasaku, even his main characters are like, hey, you're shot, you're dead, that's it. Like he doesn't mess around. He shows violence for what it truly is, ugly.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. Um, and I know that was kind of revolutionary in the 70s with him and his career, because he started the whole Jitsuroku genre, which, for those who are kind of uninitiated, I guess, in case you are listening, is Jitsuroku genre films basically are considered real account or true account Yakuza films. So what they are is basically they're based on true stories. Like to sum it up, they're based on true stories. Obviously, they're changed quite a bit, but in with it comes kind of as Fukusaku put it once, he tried to approach it from a more of a documentary style. I don't mean that in terms of the filmmaking, but it's like it's like you are watching these events unfold. This is how these events unfold because this is how these events would unfold in real life type thing. Even though there's still a bit of glamorization and a bit turned up for entertainment and shock value and things like that, but it's still very grounded. It's not a Ninkyo. Because that's the big difference between like Ninkyo, Yakuza film, and Jitsuroku. Ninkyo is kind of based on more classic tales of Japanese chivalry, that kind of thing. Like it's very rooted in pre-war tales about glorious old Yakuza Ronin and just being the hero and the man's man, the man of ultimate honor, this completely dressed up and stuff, which I know some people prefer Ninkyo to Jitsuroku because they find Jitsuroku to be a bit too dark, maybe, or it's too. They find it a bit gratuitous in its violence and kind of its. I don't know what you would say. Like it's lean on the realities of things. Just so those of us are aware, when we're throwing these terms around, that's kind of what we're referring back to, and that's what Fukusaku was known for with the Jinji series or the Battle series. That's what he kind of really brought in with that, because the film we'll be talking about a little bit later on is also a Jitsuroku film. So yeah, just throwing in definition now since we're talking about it. So
Definitely, definitely. But yeah, but overall, like to me, besides that one flaw, I think Triple Cross is just excellent. I think it's a great film. If anything, you know what? I've actually met people that actually like this film more than they like his 70s film.
I could see that.
Because a lot of them, they're just like, you know, because the thing is, we'll get to it when we talk about one of his Yakuza films in a bit. His style in those films are a lot more chaotic. They're a little too much, and there's a lot going on. Where I feel Cross has a very simple plot, to where it's more focused on the action than it is on the story and the characters.
Yeah, I was gonna get into this when we talk about Legend actually, because the interesting thing about Fukusaku is as a director to me, he's one of the most versatile directors, and he doesn't really get talked about for this because he revolutionized things with the Jitsuroku genre and other bits, and everyone seems to focus on that. But in his later years, when he moved away from that, he makes a wide variety of films, and he does it well. And it's a shame that a lot of people don't talk about that, because I think it's amazing. Because I mean, the next film we're going to talk about, Legend of the Eight Samurai, was the highest grossing film in Japan for the entire year of that release, and it broke records. And it's like, this is the same guy who made Battles, but he just turned around and made a big blockbuster family film.
Yeah, exactly. No, or let's also throw in there. This is a guy that did Message from Space, the Star Wars
Yeah,
ripoff.
yeah. The Message in Space as well, yeah. And, what's the other one? The Green Lizard,
Oh, the Green Lizard. Oh no,
the
Green Slime. Green Slime.
Green Slime,
Green
and Black
Slime.
Rose as well.
He did Green Slime. I mean, like, you know what? I was gonna say too. Like, is there anything else we need to talk about Triple Cross? Because I think this is a good transition to talk about Legends.
Yeah, well, that's what I was building into.
Sorry.
See, this is why I'm the host, Jonathan.
My bad. My bad. I just saw that as like, you know what? We're talking about it. Let's move into
Yes.
it.
No, it's all good. Yeah, so, on that, Legend of the Eight Samurai, 1983, also known as Samurai Hakenden, or Satomi Hakenden, sorry. This was the highest grossing film of Japan in 1983 to 1984. It grossed 2.4 billion yen in distribution, with another 700 million from VHS sales that were distributed on the day of release. They released 50,000 copies only on the day of release to make money back on this film. Its budget was 1 billion yen total. It was a co-production between Kadokawa and Toei. It was filmed at Toei Kyoto. It took up 9 sound stages in Toei Kyoto. This was a massive, massive production for the time, which obviously Kadokawa Pictures were kind of known for their spectacle productions with, G.I. Samurai and, what was the other one? Never Give Up, which I rewatched the other night. It kind of spurred this thing into existence. The plan was to actually do this film as a sequel straight after the release of Sailor Suit and Machine Gun. With Hiroki Yakashimaru's success on that, they wanted to capitalize, because when Sailor Suit opened up in Japan, it opened up as a double bill alongside Rage or Blazing Valiant, sorry, which starred Hiroyuki Sanada. So they were kind of a tag team dual showing that brought in big money. So the idea for the next films for them was to combine Hiroyuki Sanada and Hiroko to this one production. That was kind of the idea, but there were delays in it by 2 to 3 years, because originally it was going to be a Toho production. It was going to be a Toho and Kadokawa production, but there was a bit of a fallout there over the School in the Crosshairs film, the Obayashi film, and distribution rights with that. There was a bit of political disagreement, so to speak, behind the scenes. So Toei came in to pick up the slack. However, production was delayed by about 2 to 3 years because Hiroko needed to go to university. Because she chose to. Kadokawa he had so much faith in her that he was happy to delay production so she could go to school. But unfortunately, she didn't have enough days, so she ended up having to redo half of the year while she was filming the film anyway. She actually went down with acute appendicitis and heavy depression
Oh shit.
during the filming, which she fought through for the entire film. She only took a week off during filming. Now, what's kind of fascinating about this is it was filmed over like an entire year. it literally filmed all the way up until like 2 weeks before release. They were still filming. So this was like a last minute finish. And yeah, obviously big success. There is an argument to be made that this is kind of a Japanese Star Wars for some people of a generation. Not as in it's Star Wars made in Japan, but kind of the cultural impact of the film, the pop culture impact was very, very similar. The singles done by John O'Brien, the soundtrack was like number one for a while. There's just so much around this film that it was very, very big. And to be honest, knowing as much as I do about this film now, having researched it, because I will be doing a deep dive on this next year, but I'm kind of surprised that this has largely been lost to time outside of Japan. I mean, it did get a 4K UHD release last year, a brand new restoration, which is what I have. It looks beautiful. It still has some of the typical problems that Japanese 4Ks have, but it really looks good. I mean, visually, this film is amazing, and it was actually shot by the cinematographer who Kitano uses. So I think that kind of added to a visual flair for the film because it does look really, really good. Like set design, art design, lighting, everything in it is really, really nice. It transports you into that fantasy Jidaigeki world without being too jarring or being dull. It's very believable, and all of the effects, most of them anyway, hold up really well. Like the puppets for some of the monsters and stuff actually still look really good even in 4K. So I'm kind of impressed in that because I only watched that very recently. I'm still shocked that this film doesn't get talked about in the West. It seems like it's a perfect candidate for an hour release to me or Eureka or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that like to me, in my opinion, I'm amazed that Arrow has not picked up like the rights to even distribute it. Because didn't they distribute Sailor Suit and Machine Gun?
Yeah, recently, last year.
Yeah, you would think that like this film, especially with the cast. I mean, you got Sandra, you got Sonny Chiba, Kenji Fukasaku. I mean, the all-star cast, the people that are involved. Like this is, I mean, this already is going to be selling gangbusters because of the content and the all-star cast. It's amazing that no one has picked that up yet.
Yeah, and this is a family film. I mean, well, it's a family film in terms of Japanese family films because there's some stuff in there which wouldn't pass in the West.
That is true.
But yeah, like beheadings and blood and
And some crazy jump scares. There is a moment that I have to say I remember because I will say I haven't seen this film in a very long time, but I really enjoyed it. But there's this moment I remember where this woman she turns into like an insect or something.
yep, yep.
Oh yeah, and I remember it does like a harsh cut, and it just I remember watching this like in the middle of the night, and I jumped. Holy shit!
Yeah. Yeah, which those puppets and everything we're talking about, they still held up today. So, it's just kind of like it's surprising how well, and I think it's a testament to the practical effects of the time, because they do still hold up. I could say so many good things about this film from a technical aspect, but there's just, as I was explaining to Jonathan off air when we were talking, there's a deep, deep history of this film, which I have notes and notes on, which is why I'm going to do something separate on it in the future, which we don't have time for today. This film kind of surprised me when I first saw it because I saw it quite recently, only a couple of years ago or about a year ago. I had seen parts of it on DVD at a friend's house, but I never knew what it was called because I kind of was just catching parts of it and it looked kind of like an anime. The comparison I use with this film is I kind of equate it to Ninja Scroll for people who like don't know who have seen Ninja Scroll because there's a very similar visual kind of tone to it. But you wouldn't think it was a Fukasaku film either. Like if I put this film on to somebody who knew Fukasaku but maybe didn't know about this film at all, right? Like maybe they'd only seen Battle Royale and then the Battles series, maybe Message from Space. If I put this on and they had no knowledge of Fukasaku, I don't think you'd be able to like say this was a Fukasaku film. And I think that's part of what makes it so good.
Yeah, because the thing is too, it's like I always felt that when the '80s came in, like his style of filmmaking completely changed. And I've heard some hardcore fans go like, "Oh, I don't like Fukasaku's later work." I gotta say, some of his stuff from the '80s is some of his best work of his career, especially not just this film, but another film that he did that I would love to talk about in depth one day was a film called Fall Guy,
Yep.
it was basically like the film that kind of like really helped him become a much more commercial director, and he won his first Japanese Academy Award for his film. I mean, for his work in that film. And like, I just feel like he really toned down the the Jisuru style that he was doing, that French New Wave style that he was bringing in every single film that he was doing. It was so toned down, but for me, it really showed how diverse he was as a filmmaker.
Yeah. No, exactly. And this is as a cast. The reason why I didn't list this cast off is because it is genuinely it's an ensemble cast. There's like 20, 30 big names.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, my personal favorite of it is actually the villainess. I love her in this. She gives the strongest performance in my mind. Like she just eats up that demonic noble woman. She's just such a presence on screen. What's strange is she is overacting, but it doesn't come across as overacting. It's like it's believable for the character, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because she's doing very theatrical movements and that overblown stuff. But again, it works. It just all works because they're all like that. Like all the villains are like that, and even some of the protagonists are like that, and it just works in the world. Now, what's funny is Hiroyuki, his character Shinbei, I didn't like him the first time I watched this movie, especially in the beginning because he's quite abrasive, I guess is the best way to describe it. Because he's kind of
He's pretty forgettable.
he's forgettable, but it's very obviously I just rewatched this like before recording, so it's fresh in my head. But it's forgettable in one way, but in another way, it's like he's that stereotypical almost delinquent because he's like, I'm man, I'm samurai now. Yeah, yeah, and like I mean, one of my friends, when he saw the film, he used the word rapey to describe him. He's What's weird about this film is it's a love story,
Of
right?
course.
It's a love story, and it's about justice and vengeance and breaking a family curse and all of that because it's based on a novel that came out a couple years earlier, which is based off of a Japanese myth of Princess Fusei and stuff. So yeah, this particular story goes way way back. The beginning half of the film, him with the princess, Hiroki's character, she's just being bullied by him basically.
Yeah.
Like he's just grabby and handsy
He
and
was a dick.
yeah, he is a prick, and then they try to redeem him later on, which I guess it kinda works. I still felt the same way at the end. It kinda works, but yeah, like, on this film itself, spectacle-wise and scale, it's massive, and it does hold up, but something I really like, which struck out to me when I rewatched it recently, for a Fukasaku film, he is utilizing cinema as art here,
Mm.
and what I mean by that is historically, especially Jidaigeki films Fuku has done, they have been very exposition heavy. Lots of dialogue.
I see what you mean. Okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is kind of normal for the genre, politics and this, that, the other. But Fukusaku in particular was known for being heavy into that at that time. But he doesn't do that for Legend. A lot of the film is just looking at pictures with no one talking.
Can I say this about Legends? And I always got this vibe. I felt like Legends, especially, like for me, you know how we talk about pace? I think Legends is stuck on fast forward because that movie never stops.
No.
It's just like one thing after another, and I like that about the film because like an adventurous epic film like that, you have to go balls out and just overall wildness. It just works so well to the film.
This is 80s Japan in film format. Like, if you watch this and don't know that it's 80s right away because it just hits you with the 80s soundtrack, like it literally does. It goes Katakawa logo and then bang, music.
Yeah, but can I just say this? A lot of 80s films, like Japanese 80s films, some of them are as slow as a snail moving.
True, true. I mean, I'm a big fan of them, but I know what you mean because they lean into the melodrama.
The melodrama, and if we want to talk about exposition, like I felt like there was more exposition films coming out in the 80s than they were in the 70s and 60s. And don't get me wrong, like Japanese cinema has this thing where it's like a lot of their films is heavy exposition. A majority of their films are. Even like Kurosawa's best films, like there was always a lot of information being told,
Mhm.
but but they were able to balance it out with action and also telling the story visually as well with movement. Where there's some films even from the 80s where like you'll see characters talk for 3 minutes straight, and it's just like, okay, where is this going? Is this supposed to be important? Like, am I supposed to feel some sort of emotion towards this? Whereas, this film is a good example of like, boom, fuck all that. Like, here it is. It's action packed, balls to the wall. What you see is what you get. Enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think what I meant by the visual as well is like he utilizes visual imagery to tell the story. There are some scenes where there's absolutely no dialogue, but it's not boring, it's not dull, it's not like it slows down to a static shot with nothing. He's just telling the story through the actors just doing physical actions on screen, with no dialogue, or he's allowing the actors to kind of have those little character moments, so to speak, but it never takes away from the pacing, to your point, John. I think that this is kind of a showcase for him in a way, and I think it's a really nice side of Fukasaku that I don't see often, even in his later films, even like Triple Cross, for example. He does do it a bit there, but not to as much effect as he does in Legend. So, or Hitomi Sakanden, however you want to Hakenden, sorry, however you want to call it. It's a nice change of pace, especially from typical Jidaideki films. Because the only other director I can think of who kind of does that visual style is Kurosawa for Jidaideki, really.
And I'm gonna throw in Gosha as well.
Yeah, true.
I'm gonna throw him in there because I feel like some of his samurai films are just visual masterpieces. Like, especially like, I know I was praising Samurai Wolf earlier, but I can never pronounce the name of this film. It's the one with Tatsuya Naradaki and Tetsuro Tamba. Go Yukin.
Goyuken?
I think am I pronouncing it right? Oh man, that to me is one of the greatest samurai films I've ever seen. And from a visual standpoint, it is just breathtaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those. That's why I'm like so shocked that this film has just been lost to time because it's, again, outside of Japan or Asia, I should say, because it was a big hit around Asia as well. But like, I'm just so surprised because this is almost like perfect. Like, if I wanted to show someone a Japanese film, just a general 80s Japanese film, a non fan of Japanese cinema that has maybe a bit of inclination towards fantasy, I'd put this on. You know what I mean? Like, it's a safe film to show someone or to gateway someone into J-Cine to a degree. It's not necessarily the perfect film, but it has all of the local flavor and the unique flavor of J-Cine versus it being kind of like toned down or washed down. It still hits you in all the right notes and gives good examples. And yeah, it's just a good fantasy epic. The action is great, all done by Sonny Chiba and others, and Hiroki Hiroko, sorry. That's the problem. I've got I've got 2 names in front of me. I've got Hiroko and Hiroyuki next to each other. So it's like I kind of mix them up, but Hiroko did all of her own stunts. She learned to ride horses for this film, all of that. Everyone's doing their own stunts. You can tell everyone's putting 110% into this film. No one is phoning it in. No one is phoning it in anywhere. And it just shows like this is just one of those movies that I think, even though for some it's forgettable maybe because it's a bit too generic, but it's just a nice it's a blockbuster. It's a good example of a Japanese blockbuster. Kind of like a Godzilla, I guess, without the Godzilla-ness, because Godzilla would be the next film that would be one of the highest grossings following. So it's interesting to see a film like this that came out just before Godzilla 84.
Well, I'll tell you this: I can't wait for us to talk about Godzilla because we could talk about that for decades.
Yeah. So John wants to do an episode with me on Goji, so we will. Which, speaking of, when we're recording this, is my weekly or yearly Goji marathon happens this week. So I will be sitting down and watching all the Heisei films back to back. So I'm looking forward to that as a Fox giving tradition. So yeah, I don't know what can really be said about this film in detail because a lot of it is very typical, but each character of the Hakenden has kind of their own unique backstory as to why they're a member of the Hakkenden. You know, they're all basically there to guard the princess and to help her fulfill this thing to break a curse that has been placed on her. It's Princess Shizu is the name. And, you know, basically they're up against this group of demons carrying on this curse because they feel wronged and whatnot. So it's just basically it's good versus evil. There's nothing too deep with this, but everything is given the right emotional weight, I would say. And you kind of feel for some of these samurai characters, some of the Hakkenden. Like Sonny Chiba's character is dying and he's trying to fulfill his destiny before he dies because he's got some disease. The female of the group, I've forgotten her name, she's an orphan. She's never had love. She's an assassin because she's just taken that as her fate. You know, and there's misfits that are part of the group and stuff. And you don't really necessarily spend a lot of screen time with these, but they have enough individual moments either in their introduction or later on where you get a good feeling for these characters and you get to know them without it overtaking the main story so it doesn't get bogged down with subplot or anything like that. The only real subplot here is you know, the love story between Hiroko and Hiroyuki. You know, there's some interesting twists and turns, definitely. It's not I wouldn't say it's predictable. You know, as much as it's a mainstream film, I don't think it necessarily plays it safe or is predictably boring or anything like that because without getting into spoilers, some things that the demons do is unexpected and some of what happens with the eight samurai that's unexpected as well. It's not super formulaic in that way and the visual design just helps elevate it and carry the film because it is almost like for some shots, you know, every frame is a picture. It's really, really good. I can't say enough good things about this movie to recommend it. And I don't mean to sound like I'm fanboying. It's genuinely not because while this is my one of my favorite Japanese movies, I would reach for other movies before this unless I was in the mood for it. So it's like I think this is the greatest film ever made. Everyone go out and watch it or
Yeah.
anything like that. You know, I just own the poster. Like
Hmm.
I just own the vintage poster because the art for it is so nice and I like the film. So, someone please bring this over on Blu-ray for God's sake. Bring it over in the West, please. You know, even if Discotheque are listening, this would be a perfect fit for them.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, like I said, Arrow, you know, again, all the stunt work's cool. The ending sequence in particular is very action packed. It doesn't let up. You know, it takes a while to get there, but when it gets there, it's meaty, continues. Lots of sword fighting, lots of magic, lots of explosions, lots of special effects, monsters, demons, the full hit. Again, this is a generic movie in terms of cinema. It is very generic, but it's also really just well done.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, it's a great film. I mean, listen, I've if you notice, I've let you talk all about it because it's like just from your excitement from this just shows you like how much of a great film it is. And I would recommend it as well. I think it is a very enjoyable samurai flick that hopefully one day it gets a Blu-ray release in both the UK and the US.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, again, and the soundtrack is amazing. If anyone likes 80s rock, it covers all the bases there. Definitely check this out. Please do. If you can find the DVDs. Don't watch the terrible English dub,
Yeah, that's all about it
which is
though.
kind of known,
Ugh.
sadly, for memeing.
Uh, let's not talk about that because I have seen it. Matter of fact, like you can find this movie on streaming, but guess what? The streaming services has the crappy, shitty VHS quality English dub.
Yeah, because of course it does. Why wouldn't it?
Ah, the gift and the curse of being a Japanese cinema fan.
Hey, I I will say this: nothing is as cheesy as Hong Kong dubs.
True. Well, at least Hong Kong films are easier to find. Japanese films, you have to go far and beyond to find those films.
Hmm. Yes, that is true. Even though, funnily enough, Japan actually, especially Toei and Toho, they used Hong Kong as their export dubs. Whenever they produced like an official export dub
Yeah.
for film, like the Godzilla films or whatever, they would use Hong Kong dub actors to do it. But apparently, they did it on an even cheaper budget than the Hong Kong actors, or the Hong Kong films, which is why they were such low quality because there were some stories of some turnaround times being like 5 days. Like literally, here's the script, you have 5 days to translate it and dub it.
Oh shit.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And I think that's why some of those films turned out that way. But yeah, that's a whole history lesson and another thing unto itself.
Yeah, man. Is there anything else we need to talk about with this film?
No, not that wouldn't bore people, because like I said, I can go into a whole history with this film, and that for those that wanna know, there will be something separate coming. I'm gonna work on a project for next year for that, because I was personally surprised at how much history was involved in this film. I knew it was, big in Japan and popular and this, that, the other, but there is a lot of interesting things, to do with this, which I will, talk about at a future date next year, so which, should coincide nicely with the 30th anniversary. But, yeah, moving on, we're going back in time now. So we've started in the 90s. I didn't plan it this way, I swear to God. We started in the 90s and we've gone back to the 80s, and now we're gonna go all the way back to 1977.
All right, we're gonna talk about this film.
Hokuriku Proxy War. Kinji Fukasaku's last Yakuza film or traditional Jitsuroku film.
I would say it's his last Yakuza film because even though Triple Cross has like Yakuzas, I don't consider that for me to. I don't consider that film to be a Yakuza film.
No. So just really quick about this film. It stars Hiroyuki Matsukata, Yumiko Nagawa, Sunny Chiba, Mikiko Narita, Ko Nishimura. Basically, it's the 70s Toei crew.
Yeah.
And on that, because I don't know if I'll get an opportunity to talk about this again, Hiroki Matsukata, do you think he's one of the most underrated actors from that time period?
Oh, wholeheartedly, absolutely. What sucked about him was that he got overshadowed by like actors like Bunta Sugawara, Ken Takakura, Koji Shirara, like, and Sonny Chiba. But in my opinion, at that time, I think he was, in my opinion, like the backbone of Toei in the 70s. Because yes, you have the stars, but underneath Bunta, you had guys like Hiroki who were literally still putting out great films and giving stellar performances in those B-level Yakuza films that Toei were producing. And I always considered him to be a star, an actor with such high caliber, just a high caliber acting style. And for me, in my opinion, I felt he got better as the years went on.
Yeah, I mean, his Yakuza films that he did in the 80s are some of my all-time favorites. And it's mainly because of him. Like, he really carries the performances that he puts in. He's genuinely in my top three. If I had to pick a top three from Toei, he's in that. He's in there. Or top five, he's in there.
Oh, he's in my top five. I'm with you.
So, and I do feel like it's kind of a shame that he largely got overshadowed by, as much as I love Sonny Chiba, Chiba's like my number one or number two, depending on the day.
Yeah, I don't, and I'm sorry to cut you off. It's funny that you mentioned that because there was a time, like when they were doing New Battles Without Honor and Humanity Part Two. Um, Originally, Hiroki was supposed to be in that film. He was actually supposed to be um, Bunta Sugawara's right hand man, but he turned it down because he said straight up, "I'm tired of playing second fiddle to Bunta. Like, I'm a star. I'm a lead actor. I've had my own lead films. I'd rather do a B level, low budget film, me as a star, than be supporting because I know what my capabilities of, and I know that I could do it." And in my opinion, he's right. And I feel that like when it comes to like Yakuza films, I feel like a lot of people just remember him as like, oh, he's basically second fiddle to Bunta, when in my opinion, he can hold his own.
Yeah.
Or sometimes even outshine Bunta in some of his own films.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, like I said, I'm a big fan of him. I've seen a lot of his films at this point, almost as many as Chiba's and even Bunta's. I don't know. I think of him before I think of Bunta, which I know is probably weird to a lot of people because Bunta's Bunta. I mean, he's a legend. It's like Bunta and Takakura are both pretty much untouchable. I don't know. I wish he got more love, and I wish more of his films would come over here. I really, really do.
Oh yeah.
Obviously this one that we're going to talk about, but even his 80s stuff and his performances in like 13 Samurai, and all that, he's just, or 13 Assassins, sorry, he's just great. He's just really, really good, can hold his own, brings a unique energy to his films, and he's got a good range too. So in Hokuriku, he's like this ball of manic energy. And it's great, but equally, like, he's done other films where he's the stoic, Kenta Kakura type. and it's believable every time. But in this particular film, he's a ball of energy. So let me just get into the synopsis of this one. So in the setting of the Hokuriku region, where the snow and cold winds rage, yay kaze, for the first time in true life Yakuza film history, director Kinji Fukasaku shows battles amongst Yakuza who value land over tradition. Hiroki Matsukata stars as Noboru Kawada and a Hokuriku Yakuza, who will use any measure for survival, disregarding parents, brothers, and tradition. I think that's kind of a weak synopsis, but it's a fair one at the same time.
I just say this? I mean, of all the films that we've talked about so far, trying to explain this film is probably the most difficult thing.
Yeah, which is why I've allotted the most time for it.
I you know what? I'll take that because there's so much going on in this film. And mind you, this film is like only 90 minutes, but the fact that they stuffed a lot of plot, a lot of like just backstabbing turmoils going on, it would be really hard to describe this film in one. So I'll take that. And I just, to me, this is actually one of my favorite Yakuza films from the 70s.
Yeah, same.
I love this film. Anytime I go back and I watch this film, I always get just a pure enjoyment from watching it.
Yeah. On that note, while we're here, I would not recommend this film to anybody who is not already familiar with Jitsuroku or
Yes.
has a good grounding in Yakuza politics or just the filmmaking style of the time. Because even Battles, as much as Battles is highly regarded, I would never recommend that as someone's first Yakuza film.
I agree.
I know some people like to use it as a gateway, but I definitely think Hokuriku is even worse than Battles in that regard. Because unless you've,
Yeah.
as Jonathan mentioned, there is so much going on in this film, and its pacing does not let up. This is unhinged Fukasaku pacing.
Yeah, and like this is not to me, this is a film not made for international audience. Like
No.
Toei is doing this for their audience, and it's just their audience. Like they know that their audience will love this. This is not for anybody else. I agree. I would not recommend this to anyone who is trying to get into like classic Yakuza films.
No, no. If you can track it down. But it's it's very much also steeped in Japanese culture because of the northern region. There's a lot of references to the tribal mentality there, and it's not a typical Yakuza because it is very unique. Because there is a whole thing where there's the usual Kansai trying to move up there, and the mainlanders, the Kanto regions trying to move up there, and even opposing sides are still adamant that it's like, no, this is locals only. Get the hell out. We don't want you here. On that, Sonny Chiba,
Hmm.
one of his best looks.
One of his best looks, but one of his more forgotten roles.
Agreed.
Because he's not given much to do. I think he was just added for star power.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does. Like, listen, he is styling and profiling
Oh yeah.
with that beard and the tinted shades and his hair. Like, like he is vintage 70s Chiba, and I love it. And it's a shame that he has such a small role here because like you really don't see him do much. He interacts with the main character, but like I remember being a bit disappointed. Like, man, I like the way the film made it seem like I was expecting him to be like the main antagonist, and he's not.
Yeah, or come in and be the help ultimately. And like you said, he's not, it's others. It's interesting because again, this is another Toei ensemble cast. Man, how to start?
Well, do you want to start with like the backstories and like how what like to me, I think the behind the scenes production is just as interesting as the film.
Yeah, we could go for that. So the basic, just to give an overview of what this film is basically there's a rebel Yakuza, kind of rebel, who's just doing his own thing. That's Hiroki's character. He's trying to ascend. He's trying to gain what was taken for him because the boss promised him certain things and then he backed out on it, typical Yakuza fashion. And then he just goes on this rampage of just annihilating everybody. And I mean, it's not like an action rampage where he's like constantly, like cutting heads off and stabbing people and shooting people. But he's always moving towards his goal. There's no patience. There's absolutely zero politicking in the background, really. Are some moments of it, but it's not like this downtime of, okay, we wait and strike for the right moment. No, he starts moving and he goes.
Yeah, like if I had to describe Hiroki here, he's basically Joe Pesci from Goodfellas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he is so unhinged, so uncontrolling. He like you said, he has very little patience. And the thing is, like, he's trying to be a boss, but he doesn't have the patience, nor I feel like the intelligence to be like the main boss. He's just too crazy and too wild to be that boss. I mean, the opening film is him burying his boss in snow and, is trying to run him over with a Jeep. And that just shows you how unhinged this guy is. All because he was promised something when he got out of jail. And instead of like talking it out, it's like, no, I'm going to kidnap my boss, bury him in the winter, and maybe threaten to run him over with my Jeep.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so on the uniqueness of this film, one of the things that makes this film stand out is absolutely the use of the environment. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of like local methods of torture and interrogation, and also just kind of their relationship with their land, their local land, i.e. the snow. And there's a lot of creative usage of that, and I think it's a very important strength and part of the film's personality, because it kind of makes it stick out. Because yeah, everyone thinks about the burying in the snow thing, like everyone thinks about that scene, but even some of the more subtle usages of it throughout are just memorable and also give a sense of this is how they do things there. And I don't mean in Japan. I mean, I'm talking about locally in that village, in that region, in that port town. There's a strong sense of local identity, which I think is a strength of the film. And it's also gives it a more unique angle on your typical Jitsuroku that takes place in Osaka or even Tokyo.
Yeah, like that's the one thing I really do like about this film too, and I agree. It's just like I to me, from a visual standpoint, I think it's the most unique looking Jitsuru film because of the snow.
Mm.
Every like you said, every Yakuza film from the 70s was either in Tokyo, Osaka. It was like,
Or
in the city
Yokohama
or
in some
Yokohama.
areas.
Yeah, it was a lot of Yokohama films.
Okinawa as well, I
Oh,
suppose.
oh, and we cannot forget Hiroshima.
Yeah.
God, I mean, God, almost every Yakuza film from the 70s and on, it was Hiroshima, Hiroshima. But I love that they went into a different location and to me, I think the snow is a character.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was kind of getting at. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a character. I agree. I love that. I think that to me, it just makes it go like, wow, I feel like I'm really watching a completely different film than what I usually see because Toei films, and I've heard this from a lot of people and a lot of critics, they often have a bad reputation of all looking the same, which to me I think is a load of shit. But whenever people say that, I go, well, watch this film. This looks nothing like any of the other typical Yakuza films from that time. Like this looks different.
Do you know what I think? And this is a personal theory of mine. I think when people say that, what they picture in their head is the 60s films.
Yeah, I think they're thinking more of like the Ninkatsu films.
Yeah, I think that that's what people picture in their head without knowing. Because I have an aversion to like 60s film. Not like I think it's terrible necessarily, but aesthetically and stuff like that, I struggle to get into it. It looks old to me, or it looks. I'm talking in general. I'm not talking about the unique ones that came out, some of the Teruishi stuff and stuff. I'm talking about things like that have 10 films to a series or whatever. They all look very same. So I wonder if that's kind of where people get their stuff mixed up, because I was initially a bit trepidatious about going too far into 70s stuff, which obviously was a big goal of mine this year that I've managed to do because I studied it in film. When we did when I was in film class and stuff, and we did Asian film and stuff, we talked a lot about the 70s and 70s Japan, and some of the films I watched were really boring. Like, we talked about battles, but we didn't watch battles. You know what I mean? We watched some of the more tame stuff that I can't even remember, but it was all just like basic husband and wife drama. Felt like Ozu type films. And yeah, I think that a lot of people do get those wires crossed when they think about the 70s stuff and it all looking the same, because While I do think that, Fukasaku's Jitsuroku style has a signature to it, it certainly doesn't even all look the same. I mean, even I watched the Battles films back to back. I watched them all at once back to back, and they didn't all look the same to me. They still had his visual signature and some of his, cuts and the editing and obviously the lighting techniques and things, but it didn't feel like I was watching like Showa Godzilla movies or something back to back where they're reusing the same set clearly
Yeah.
or they're reusing, so yeah, I get what you mean. And I strongly disagree with that statement as well. But also I do then question, is it a case of what's really available in the West that might be coloring that?
I think so because, and also too, like, I have a feeling you may disagree on this, and I don't want to touch too much on this because I still feel like there's a lot more to talk about with Proxy War. I think some of the other films that have come out from that era that weren't directed by Fukasaku, some of them were trying very hard to be like his films. Like for me, in my opinion, Tattoo Hitman, which actually got released here in the West, but it was dubbed in the 70s.
And butchered to hell.
I finally got a chance to see the uncut Japanese version a year ago. I felt that that was like an intimidation, like a very, very low rent version of a Fukasaku or even a Sado Nakajima or Junya Satu Jitsuru film. And I think when people see those type of films, they go like, it's all the same shit. Narrations, freeze frames, handheld violence, and it's just like all these characters. I could see why people might get frustrated and be like, oh, it's the same stuff. But like, I that's when I go like, well, have you seen some of these other films where we could debate about that? Hell, even Ken Takakura's one of his last Yakuza films that he did in the 70s, Winter's Flower.
Yeah. Yeah.
That to me, in my opinion, is the most unique Toei Yakuza film to ever come out in the 70s because it looks nothing like they've done before.
I can see that. I can see that. I have watched a lot of Takakura. I tend to watch more Takakura in the winter, no pun intended. I don't know why, I just do.
Because it puts you to sleep?
No. No, I'm more in the mood for it. I think it's that hibernation thing. No, I see your point there too, but I really like Tattoo Hitman as well. But I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean, and I get it. But I do wonder if it is largely an availability thing too, because I think that's why the Fukusaku box set that Arrow did that wasn't Battles did so well too, because it contained what Doberman Cop, Street Mobster, and Cops versus Thugs. And I think those films were different and unique enough that it kind of got people's attention, visually and stuff, even though they cover a lot of the same themes in different ways. But visually, they're very different looking films outside of, Fukusaku's style.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's why I hate when people say that. I'm quick to like just shut them up and be like, no, not all of them look the same. I think you guys are just, getting it confused with his films. But anyway, back to this film.
Yeah. No, exactly. Sorry. I mean, this is a Fukusaku focused episode, so we did kind of want to talk about Fukusaku as well as just the films. So that's why this episode's kind of a special and it's unique because we're doing a director focus. So yeah, anyway, yeah, back to Hokuriku. It's manic, it's crazy. Yeah, some of the story behind it, John knows more about this than I do, which is why I wanted to bring him on and talk about this film specifically with him. So go for it, man. Let's hear it.
Yeah, so this film had a very, very troubled production. I mean, this was Fukasaku has said of all the films that he has done in his career, this was the most difficult production he has ever been a part of because so much was happening. For example, originally Bunta Sugarawa was supposed to play the lead role, but he backed out at the last minute due to illness. He got sick. So Hiroki was like a second minute replacement, and from the moment they started filming, it was just a disaster because when they were filming in the Haruku region, the snow was so bad that like half of the time they had a hard time getting equipment out there on set. Things were just going bad. Half of the crew got sick due to like just the very, very like strict cold. And actually, another thing that a lot of people might not know, another Toei actor by the name of, I can never say his name, Tsunitsuko Watase, who he was actually supposed to play a big role in that film. But what happened was there's a scene where, we were talking about it earlier. It's the scene where Hiroki's character is threatening to run over his boss's head, and his boss's head is buried in the sun. while they were filming that scene, the Jeep lost control due to it just, basically spinning around in the snow. Watase fell out of the truck and his legs got ran over by the Jeep.
Yeah, that was the injury. Yeah, I did read about that because there's a trailer out there. One of the original trailers out there actually has some of
Him.
his scenes in it. Yeah.
Yeah. He's even in. Matter of fact, I could be wrong, but I remember seeing this. There's a poster of his face in the poster. So he was supposed to be in it, but because of that, like they had no choice but to recast him with Goro Ukubi. So that was another trouble thing. And also, um, so for those that don't know, Hokuriku is based on a true story, as as they like to, say it's a true account, the Jigsaw film. So the real life gangster who Hiroki plays in this film, weeks after the film came out, he was actually killed. And matter of fact, the location that they use, because there's a scene in the film where Hiroki's character is being attempted to be assassinated.
Yeah, it's a real life
It's
cafe.
a real life cafe. Yeah, so the real life gangster was actually killed in that same exact cafe weeks after the premiere. And that really scared Fukasaku off. Like when he heard about that, it kind of like just shook him a bit. And he went on record to say, I don't want to make any more movies like this.
So I haven't seen any documentation of this, but I have heard through yourself and other people, and I have read around online that that was definitely, like you said, a big thing. I haven't seen it I haven't seen any interviews where he's confirmed that. He's always kind of skirted around the topic when it's been brought up. I think because he doesn't want to be seen as maybe the guy who walked away from it, maybe. Or at least when he was alive, obviously. But I have heard that as well, that it just kind of he allegedly it was like he did not wanna that put him off because he was so shocked that the film could have in his mind, the film could have been what caused that to happen. He felt somewhat responsible for it, even though he wasn't in any way. But it did sort of shake him that suddenly these films that he'd been making that were supposed to just be stylized accounts of existing truth, it's like then suddenly the truth was inspired by the film.
Yeah, I mean, it was really a rough time for him. And no, and then the cherry on top was the film bombed.
Yeah, it did.
It bombed really hard at the box office. And, it's often been said that like this was actually it's not the last Yakuza film because after that, like, Sado Nakajima would do his, Dawn of Japan trilogy, which was like, basically Japan, Toei's answer to the Godfather films. Like the style would change, but I've always considered this film to be the last of its era because after that, Toei completely changed their style of making Yakuza films where they felt like these all-star epics that were more melodramatic and much more slower in pace.
Yeah.
So it's basically the end of an era. And I will say, despite all the troubles, this is still a fantastic film. There are so many great moments. Because we didn't get a chance to talk about this, and I know we don't have much time, but like, I wanted to ask you, what was your favorite scene in this movie?
So it's actually there's a scene where he's buried a guy in snow and it's not with the Jeep and he's using ice water over the head and he's just using it as like a torture technique to get information out of it, which is funny because out of all the scenes, this is like the most understated. It's it's the most understated, but
It's hilarious.
I just love that. I mean, I posted a screenshot of it on my Twitter today as we're recording this. He's like saying like, "This feels very good, huh?" He's like, "It's like, oh, sugoi, you like this?" And it's just like, and the guy's like, I can't tell you," and then he just dumps the. It's like initially he's using a tea ladle for matcha, and he's just pouring slowly on this guy's head, and it's at night too, so it's like even colder.
Oh my god.
He's just slowly pouring it, and he's like, "I can't tell you where the boss is. I can't tell you where the boss is." And then he just dumps the entire bucket of ice water on his head. He's like, "Ah, the boss is in Kyoto. He's in Kyoto. He's in Kyoto." And there's no blood or anything,
No,
and
I
then
know.
they just leave him there buried. Like,
I love that. Like that is one of my favorite scenes. I matter of fact, I think it was like a couple of years ago. I shared that scene in the Toei page because I that was my favorite scene because of how hysterical it is. Because it's so over the top. Yeah, it's just black humor.
yeah, and it's understated at the same time because the thing is about a lot of this film. Sorry to cut you off. We'll circle back in a second, but a lot of it is very in your face. Most of this film is very, very in your face, like the burying with the jeep, or the crazy torture scenes, or like even some of the shootouts and the knife fights. They're very, very over the top. This is one of the few scenes that is quite understated in comparison. So yeah, sorry, and continue.
I have another one, and it's right after this scene. And I just thought, to me, it's probably for me one of Hiroki's most badass moments. It's right when he finds his other boss, not his main boss, basically like his uncle. Um, in this scene, like he confronts him, he tells him like, "Oh, you thought I was dead. Well, now I got you now." And he's escorted out of the building that they're in. They're like at a guy, I think they're like at a resort, right? So
Hmm.
he's being escorted out of the resort by by the Yakuza guys. And there's like this punk who basically like mouths off, like saying, "Oh, if this was Osaka, you would have been killed by now."
Yeah, and then yeah, another
No, no,
one.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, no, go ahead.
and then instead of so what typically happens in that kind of scene, right? To give context to this, what typically happens is there's a stare down, there's tension, and then they part ways because it would result in a war, right? That's normally what happens in these situations. But instead, Hiroki waits a moment, pulls out his knife, and just guts him. Like there's no, and this is what kind of gives Hiroki's character Nobu that unhinged thing, because he's just like, it's like he doesn't care. It's just fuck it, I'm stab you, because he's like, he follows it up with, "You've got no balls. If this was Osaka, blah 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 blah."
Right. So, like, yeah, he's basically mouthing off and saying, "Well, if you got the fucking guts, go ahead and do it." And he just stabs him with that katana, brings him down, kills him. To me, that is, in my opinion, one of the best moments in Hiroki's career. It is so badass.
And it's black and white in its presentation too. It's very black and white. Like it's just matter of fact.
Yeah, but anyway, it's a very badass moment. I just that is one of my favorite scenes. I just love that scene because I'm just like, wow. And there is a scene, I will say this movie is violent. I mean, this is one of
Yeah.
Fukasaku's more violent films.
Yeah.
I gotta say, there is a scene. It's not really a spoiler because it doesn't involve any main characters, but it's near the end of the film where they bury a couple of guys in the snow and they run them over. I literally, I remember, I still to this day, like I twist, I turn every time when they run over these guys with the jeeps. It's like, oh my god, this movie is just relentless.
Yeah. No, it does not let up. Even the exposition in there, it's done in quite short segments. Nothing like lingers. So it's like it's one of those films that if you put on, you need to be focused. You need to watch this or you will miss things. Because it's just like you can't leave for like 5 minutes without something happening. Either it being important exposition or actual action.
Yeah, man, this is no, absolutely. Like, this is not a film for anyone who has a short attention span. You have to pay attention at all times, follow the plot. And the thing is too, I think another reason why some people might be turned up by Fukasaku's films is because, again, since they're in Japanese, you have to read a lot of information, which is why, in my opinion, his films have to be seen more than once. Because even to this day, when I go back and watch some of his films, I'm learning something new or picking something up that I went, "Oh shit."
Mm.
That's just my opinion. I feel like the more you watch them, the more you enjoy them.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because you can pick up more. You can pick up more information that you might have missed, or nuances as well, because you already maybe know the main plot, so you can focus more on like what's going on in the background, so to speak, or some of the more underlying subplots of the story. Because as much as this film is kind of simplistic in the fact that it's following Nobu being crazy, or Hiroki's character being crazy, sorry. it's also layered with a lot of tiny subplots and little plotting between family members and outside clans trying to move in. While it's not as political as I would say Battles is, there's definitely a lot of tiny threads happening in a very short space of time.
Yep.
So, I mean, is there anything else you want to highlight about this film?
As of right now, no. I mean, we kind of went over like the production troubles. We went over our favorite scenes, and we explained that like while we love this film, for newcomers, this is not a film I would recommend you watch first. I would recommend you you know what? I'll say this, since we were talking about like 70s Yakuza films. If I was, I'm gonna ask you this question too. If you had to recommend a film for someone to start off with, which one would be it? But it has to be a 70s film.
Hmm. Trying to think quickly. I know this is going to sound a bit weird, probably, as recommendations, but Okinawa Yakuza War or Cops versus Thugs. Because Okinawa Yakuza War gives enough background in its story and it's slow moving enough that it tells you everything. Like, you may not get all the nuances, but it tells you everything that's going on. And it spends enough time with its characters because it's a Nakajima film. It just spends enough time that it kind of like gives you everything you need to be able to digest what's happening. And you get exposed to the more extreme era of the violence and kind of a Jitsuroku style. Even though it's not Fukasaku's style, it's Nakajima's style, it's still Jitsuroku. Cops versus Thugs, because it explains a lot of stuff. It spends a lot of time. There's a lot of dialogue, but it's not complex dialogue. It's more character driven dialogue. And it gives you a good idea of a representation of the relationships that are happening between like Yakuza and the police. There's lots of characters in there that give good examples of like cultural backgrounds, or political viewpoints, things like that.
Right.
So those are the two I would probably recommend to a total newcomer. Especially maybe for Fukusaku. I think Cops versus Thugs is a good gateway film for him in general. What would be yours?
All right, I'm gonna make mine quick because I know we got like maybe 2 minutes. Sympathy for the Underdog.
Yeah, I could see that too. It's a good recommendation, but I think it might be too slow for some people, maybe.
But you know what, too? I'll say this. I think people will accept it for what it is because it's a lot more easier to follow than Battles.
Mm,
I wouldn't recommend Battles to anyone. Like, I'm with you. I would not recommend any of the Battles films unless if you've seen some of the more slower, easy to go to films. And Sympathy is a little more approachable because it's not as crazy as those
yeah,
films. It's
that's
not
true.
as, you
It's
know what I'm
very
saying? Like,
focused. It's
it's
very
very
focused.
focused. And the thing is, to me, I consider it to be Fukasaku's laid back film.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
It's just dripping in style.
Yeah. Another one that we could probably mention that might be a good one for people is Yakuza Graveyard, actually. Uh,
I will say I'm not crazy
It's a
about
bit grim. It's a bit grim, but in terms of a digestible film, it's pretty easy to digest, is what I mean. Like,
Well, gun to my head, I'll tell you this: I'll play devil's advocate, and I'll recommend Graveyard of Honor because
I think that might be too bleak for some people. And also,
and Graveyard is not.
well, no, I'm saying Graveyard might be too bleak for some people.
No, that's why I
Oh,
threw
Graveyard
it.
of Honor. Yeah.
That's why I threw Graveyard because I'm like, if you're gonna recommend Yakuza Graveyard, I'm gonna recommend Graveyard of Honor.
I'm not sure because I'm thinking about it. Graveyard of Honor. I mean, I don't like Graveyard of Honor.
And what's funny is that I'm not the biggest fan of Yakuza Graveyard.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about it as a film, and I think it might be a bit too. Like, I think it might give people the wrong impression of Fukusaku. I mean, if it's your first kind of Yakuza film, I don't think it's a good first one because it's kind of unique. Like, regardless of how I feel about it, there's nothing really like Graveyard of Honor. I mean, so
The closest thing I would say, in my opinion, and it's not even available in the States or even in the UK, is not. It's not a Nakajima or a Fukasaku film. It's a Junya Sato film called True Account of the Secret Ginza Enforcers. That movie is hardcore.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. I know what you're talking about, though. I am familiar with it, but I haven't
Oh,
had a chance to watch it yet.
that movie is very. I think, in my opinion, Fukasaku was influenced by that film to make Graveyard because that movie is not easy to watch. It's very bleak.
Yeah. No, I get you. And I mean, like I said, I'm looking forward to watching that one, but we do have to wrap up now because we're out of time. So yeah, it's been fun having you on, man. Hoping to do some future episodes with you in the future. No double entendres there, but yeah, we've talked about some stuff. So hopefully, we can get schedules to match up and have you back on. I hope everyone has enjoyed listening because John is quite knowledgeable about stuff as well, and he's just a big film fan. So it's good to have a chat with someone like him. So, as for the future of Foxflix and Rice, it is going to now become a special episode thing. So, when I have someone who wants to come on the show that can talk about stuff and we can work schedules out and something interesting, we'll be doing specials. But next year, the channel is going to be moving into some videos finally, which I'm looking forward to. So, I hope you guys stick around for that and tune in for those. They will be uploaded randomly, but they'll be longer videos. So I'm not committing to like a monthly, upload schedule of shorter stuff or anything. It's going to be some meaty content that's worth watching. So, yeah. Other than that, hope you guys have a good Foxmas season and New Year. So, yeah, John, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for
Pleasure as
having me on,
always.
man. I appreciate it. This was fun. I'll tell you this: I cannot wait for us to do that Godzilla one day.
Yeah, I know that's going to be exciting. So, yeah, there's lots of good stuff in the works. It's just going to take some time to get out. So, thank you for tuning in, everyone, and see you soon. Foxflix and Rice is very nice.
Very nice.